Hello there and welcome to our special live coverage on ALT24 News, and we start with the latest updates on the Russian military operation in Ukraine that has reached a fifth day as Western powers roll out sweeping economic sanctions on Moscow. European allies have agreed to boost their support for Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky's government by funding and supplying it with weapons. Russia's president has escalated tensions by putting his nuclear forces on high alert, but indicated he would give diplomacy a chance. Talks are set to begin at Ukraine's border with Belarus. Ukraine's Interior Ministry says at least 352 civilians have been killed in the conflict so far. Let's follow more. Welcome again. And Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that he will put the Russian army's deterrent forces on alert, which may include a nuclear component. Putin ordered his defense minister and the chief of staff to put the Russian army's deterrent forces on a special combat alert regime in a meeting broadcasted on television. Let's follow.
I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff to put the Russian Army deterrent forces on a special combat alert. You see that the Western countries are not only hostile to our country in the economic sphere, I mean, legitimate sanctions. Senior officials from major NATO countries also allow aggressive statements against our country.
Despite the nuclear deterrence alert by the Kremlin, Russia and Ukraine agreed to hold diplomatic talks in the Belarusian region of Gomel. Hussein Berkan reports.
Moscow and Kiev agreed to hold a meeting in the Ukraine-Belarus border area, the first talks between the two sides since the start of the Russian military operation in Ukraine, while continuing Western efforts to impose painful sanctions against Moscow and its economy. Vladimir Medinsky, head of the Russian delegation, stressed that Russia is ready to negotiate peace at any time.
We're waiting for the arrival of the Ukrainian delegation. We arrived last night in the location that we agreed with Ukraine, near the Ukrainian border. We have not slept yet. Unfortunately, they had very complicated logistics, so they are postponing their arrival time.
In turn, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Kiev will have these talks, but expect no outcome.
I see things as always. Frankly, I don't believe in outcome of these talks. But we have to try, so that no Ukrainian citizens doubt that I, as a president, didn't try to stop the war when there was a slim chance.
These talks come despite the decision of Vladimir Putin to put the Russian army's deterrence force on alert, which may include a nuclear component.
I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff to put the Russian Army deterrent forces on a special combat alert.
It's noteworthy that the West imposed the most severe economic sanctions on Russia, the most important of which was excluding some Russian banks from the SWIFT system.
And for more discussion regarding this, I welcome my panel of guests here. And I start with Akram Kharif, a journalist expert in defense and security from Algeria, in addition to our in-studio guest and journalist Hussein Berkan, PhD researcher in international relations. I start with you, Akram. Welcome to our program. Here, pushing for negotiations are underway. Are there chances for these negotiations to succeed, according to you?
Probably not, because the trend today is a massive support from the Western countries towards Ukraine, and also a more general push of the Russian army in order to gain maximum terrain and also to gain maximum leverage on these future negotiations. But the fact that these negotiations are to be held today is very important. It means that there's a way to end this crisis, maybe not now, but in a near future.
In the near future, as you have put it, Akram, I ask you a second question here. Do you think that there are some parts who are trying to stop these negotiations?
Yeah, as there was some parts that were behind this war. I mean, the fact that the Western countries, the majority of Western countries, did not militarily support Ukraine before the war, and did not work on diplomatic solutions with Russia, together with Russia, and had the reality of facts. I mean, life in Donbass is hell for the population since now 8 years. I'm not blaming Ukraine, but they could have been working on a settlement of this issue and this crisis way before today's events. So, unfortunately, yes, there was a cooperation from some Western countries.
Let's say, management probably for the case from the part of some European countries. You just keep with us, Akram, and we just move on to our in-studio guest, Hussein Berkan. And here, I'm going to ask you about the nuclear, let's say, deterrence. What does it mean in the first case?
Thank you so much, Nadia, for having me. So basically, before answering your question, we need to put things into context. You know that the nuclear order, as it was used to be called, was stable for the last couple of decades. And until the decision of Vladimir Putin to put his nuclear deterrence into high alert, we can say that the nuclear order currently is not stable at all. And what nuclear deterrence is actually is an ideology dating back to the period of the Cold War, and it's a way it's a nuclear it means that if any country is threatened by a nuclear attack, the other country has the right to retaliate. This is the word that we use. Retaliate means that the other country is ready to attack the country that attacked it, and the second attack will be stronger and will destroy everything. And this ideology has been used for the first time by the United States back in the USSR period, back in the Cold War period. And President Putin putting his army in this position, they are using the same ideology and the same doctrine as the United States. But we need to emphasize also on another concept that is very important, which is DEFCON. So DEFCON is an acronym used by the United States, and it means Defense Ready Conditions, and which means that the level of readiness of the United States in receiving a nuclear attack. And this scale has been put by Pentagon, and the scale is from 1 to 5. And it expressed, for example, DEFCON 5 is the lowest state of readiness, while DEFCON 1 is like the highest state of readiness. The United States has never used DEFCON 1. There's only one moment where the United States used the DEFCON 2, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Currently, Russia is using the second, it's not DEFCON, they have another scale from 1 to 4, and it's currently using the scale number 2, which means that it's a higher scale, but it did not reach the scale number 1, which means that there is actually a nuclear war. So until now, they're just raising the alert, but they are not in a nuclear war.
This is it. When it comes on the other hand, does NATO have nuclear weapons?
Of course, Nadia, NATO member countries have nuclear weapons. But let's talk in general about all the nuclear arsenal all over the world. You know that 90% of the nuclear weapons or the nuclear heads are owned by the United States and Russia. 90%, Nadia, can you imagine this? And only 10% of the nuclear heads are owned by the rest of the nuclear countries. And even the NATO members who own the nuclear bombs or nuclear heads, the decision of using them is controlled by the United States. It's not controlled by the European countries. The United States has full control over the use of nuclear arsenal. And number one of the countries that owns the most of nuclear weapons is Russia. Russia owns currently about 6,000 nuclear heads. And then there is the United States, which owns 5,500 nuclear warheads. And the rest, as I said, is 90%, and the 10% is owned by NATO member countries. So the question here, will there be a nuclear war? The thing is that nobody knows if there is going to be a nuclear war or not. But one thing is sure, that if a nuclear war started, there is going to be destruction of humanity. And I don't think that there's going to be, a lot of analysts are saying that most likely there's not going to be nuclear war. They are using these weapons only for deterrence, for defense. They're saying to the other part that I have the same technology and the same power as you. So if you wanted to attack me, there's going to be retaliation. And this is the message. Case. Exactly. This is the message that Vladimir Putin.
High alert,
of
deterrence.
The high alert deterrence.
Thank you so much, Hussein Berkan, for bringing all of these insights. And now back to you, Akram. Putting nuclear weapons on high alert, is it a sign of President Putin's anger or weakness, according to you?
I think that Vladimir Putin and the Russian army had enough time to prepare for this war and to prepare also for all the eventualities that could happen or that could show up during this crisis, including escalation and also including the use of the nuclear threat. So far, it is one tool used by President Putin, and it should not be taken as a real threat, in my opinion. The real objective here is to, even for Vladimir Putin, is to make the war as short as possible.
As short as possible. Let me bring into our conversation Akram Lokman Kadarag, PhD researcher at International Islamic University in Malaysia via Skype. Welcome, Lokman. To what extent does the emergency of nuclear tensions at the eastern flank of NATO affect the future of international system when the US is heavily concentrating on the Indo-Pacific strategy to maintain its global dominance?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, Nadia. Now the U.S. has faced a different crisis, different situation in international politics, because at that time, when the United States focused on, as you said, in the Pacific strategy and tried to contain the rising of China, but we saw that we faced another crisis in Ukraine, in the eastern flank of NATO. Now we saw that since the invasion of Russia started to the Ukraine, so that only the sanctions coming from the West. But yesterday, Vladimir Putin instructed all the defense forces and all the nuclear arsenal of the Russian army come to and combat that, including the hypersonic missiles. This is revealed that Putin is ready for more escalation and playing his card. Now, the United States, the Western Pacific Command, is in a weak position in the face of the missiles, ballistic missiles possibly come from North Korea or China. Now, therefore, the United States currently doesn't have enough power to fighting into different theater. But when we look at the Russia, currently the sanctions seems to that the Western countries and the US try to make a biggest North Korea from the Russian Federation by implying these sanctions. But at the same time, Russia has another opportunities. Russia's, in terms of the nuclear weapons and in terms of the hypersonic weapons, poses a great threat to the European countries, Western civilization. At the same time, the Russia furthermore has the outer space ballistic missile systems. That's why now the Western and the United States especially cannot do the fighting in different theaters. I don't believe the European sanctions or the support to the Ukraine would be enough for the Ukraine to fighting with the Russia.
No, okay. Luqman, let me just bring this question to Akram. And here I ask you, Akram, on the fifth day of Ukraine, Russia does not behold on none of the major Ukrainian cities. How comes?
Oh, I think it was not intended from the Russian army to take over big city or large cities. Just because of the high expense of men in both sides. I think today the main military objective of Russia is creating a fixation point north in order to stop the Ukrainian army around the capital and at its Russian borders. And meanwhile, attack the south, which is the real objective of Russia, liberate what they consider as the Donbas Republic's territories and have a control on the coast. So that's why today we don't see these maneuvers into cities, but we can notice today a pincer maneuver towards the city of Mariupol at the south coast, and probably Russia will prevail in the southern area of Ukraine, which is their real objective once again, and not taking over Kiev and the major cities.
Luqman, for the time being, the international politics is actually facing a nuclear escalation. What will be the future of the Ukrainian crisis?
Yes, the future of Ukraine crisis, unfortunately, now reached to the level of nuclear exchange between the parties. The Russia that has been pushed by Western and United States to assassinate like the biggest North Korea. There is a huge sanctions on the Russian banks and the Swiss. But the Russia, I don't believe that if Putin without strategic calculations start to invade Ukraine. Russia also has experience from 2014 when annexation of the Crimea. That time has also the sanction from the Western countries. At that time, China come to the help and rescue the Russian banks and investments. In another way, now Russia has alternative have opportunity with some countries for exchange of currency with Iran, with Venezuela, with North Korea, with China, and the most important allies is China. Now, that backs to the history, like the McKinney and Spokesman revealed that we are faced with international politics based through the Eurasian continent, that the new axis is a pair, such as the North Korea, China, Pakistan, and Iran, and Russia together. They will strengthen to their collaboration after the Western sanctions, as we see during the invasion. Mr. Imran Khan was the president of Pakistan were in Russia at the same time, and we are aware that the situation of Pakistan, the Taliban also has a good relationship, strong relationship with the People's Republic of China. Now, the question is that to what extent the Western or United States sanctions will work If not,
We will ask this. We will give an answer to this question later on our program. Let's now move all together to have a closer look to the Russian military operation as it continues. Ukrainians from all walks of life are mobilizing to support the war effort in Dnipro, Ukraine's third largest city. An army of volunteers and humanitarian aid are working tirelessly to try to thwart the advancing Russian troops. Sofian Kenturi reports.
Aid organizations on the ground are making similar warnings as Russia continues to shell cities and villages throughout Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announces €40 million of further humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The funding will help aid agencies respond to the deteriorating humanitarian situation, helping and creating a lifeline for Ukrainians with access to basic necessities and medical supplies such as medicines, syringes, dresses and wound care packs. UK government humanitarian experts have also deployed to the regions to support those fleeing the violence in Ukraine. From the other side of the world, Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced Sunday the US will send nearly $45 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine to help those affected by the Russia's military operation in Ukraine. The Turkish Red Crescent also launched a humanitarian relief operation. The Red Crescent is sending blankets, tents, sleeping bags, cleaning and hygiene materials, as well as 5 specialists, 1 mobile kitchen and 1 disaster response vehicle.
Akram, back to you. Is Europe on the verge of a major humanitarian crisis? And how far is Europe ready for this?
Probably not, because there's no visa between European countries and Ukraine, and Ukrainians are used now since 2019 to travel a lot into Europe and to have their places where to go in Europe. So I think that the influx of migrants will be diluted amongst the European countries. The only issue today is the other nationalities refugees, the Algerians, the Tunisians, Moroccans, and mainly the students who are today in in Ukraine, and who have limited access to Schengen visa. They are today at risk, not in danger, but at risk from suffering from this situation, unfortunately.
Akram, critics say that this Russian military operation is actually done on purpose to cover internal problems, including shattered economy and corruption within the Kremlin. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a narrative that is commonly admitted by Western sources. But today we say that Russia is at its climax, economically speaking. They have like $700 billion in reserve, a working economy, enough growth, and also they have a political stability since now many years. It's very unlikely that the main reason is really that Vladimir Putin is trying to save its regime. So this is really unlikely. But I think that Vladimir Putin is trying to settle this issue of the Donbass and of the relationship with Ukraine, which he is working on since now almost 10 years.
Now, economically speaking, the Russian currency collapses as new sanctions hit. The sanctions by the US and its allies that targeted Russia's financial system made ruble fall by more than 30% against the dollar. The fall of the Russian currency will likely worsen inflation in Russia, and the Russia Central Bank said it will support the Russian financial institutions that had been hit by Western sanctions. Always with the same story, these developments with the Russian economy come after EU foreign ministers have imposed further measures against Moscow. Earlier, and in an unprecedented move, the EU agreed to supply weapons to Ukraine. Nabil Khazini reports.
European Union leaders have agreed to a further package of individual and economic restrictive measures against Russia. This follows the first sanctions that would hit 5 areas: finance, energy, transport, export controls, and visa policy. The European Union will also ban Russian state media outlets broadcasting in the bloc.
In another unprecedented step, we will ban in the European Union the Kremlin's media machine. The state-owned Russia Today and Sputnik, as well as their subsidiaries, will no longer be able to spread their lies to justify Putin's war and to sow division in our union.
Aid to the Ukrainian military was also on the list of agreements. Some 500 million euros in arms and other aid will be provided to the Ukrainian military, a first time for the EU, as the bloc's treaties bar it from using its normal budget to fund operations with military or defense implications.
We have decided to use our capacities to provide arms, lethal assistance to the Ukrainian army by a value of 450 million of support package and 50 more millions for the non-lethal supplies.
More financial sanctions will be imposed on Russia, such as removing the selected Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system. Sanctions will also be strengthened against Belarus and the country's leader, a close Russian ally, Alexander Lukashenko. The EU will impose a ban on imports of products from mineral fuels to tobacco, wood and timber, cement, iron and steel on Belarus.
And to discuss further, and back to you, Akram, lots of countries stopped dealing with the Russian central bank. How far do you think this would harm the Russian economy?
For sure, it will have a negative effect on the Russian economy, especially regarding the currency status today that is very hard now for the Russian economy. But let us remember that a country weakened like Iran suffered huge economical sanctions and suffered from a SWIFT ban for almost 5 years and did not collapse. So we can see that the sanctions, the economical sanctions, have their limits.
The economic sanctions have their limits. Luqman, what do you think? How far can Russia withstand these economic sanctions?
Yes, this is the question, how far to what extent Russia can assist to the push sanction from the Western countries and the United States. But as I mentioned earlier, Russia has experience, especially during the 2014 Crimea annexation. The Russian banks come to the level of almost the collapse by the time China go to the rescue of Russia and bring the Russia back to the survivability level. But today, what will happen is that Russia can, the China will again at the same level will support to the Russia. This is a question when we look into the relations between China and the Russia. During the Olympic, Putin attempted the Olympic and the China-Russia together make a joint statement. And previously in their meeting, they make it a $400 billion agreement. This is including the infrastructure, the gas, and some of the military and defense exchanges. I don't believe it. Of course, it will destroy some part of the Russian economy. But at the end, at the same time, these sanctions will push the Russia into a very, how I can say, very different position. And that is why yesterday the Putin announced that the nuclear power card on the table. Now the sanction is another side, has a huge problem for international order. And the Russia has experience, they can survive in any way. Because the North Korea example also, we see Iran as example, they have under the sanction, Venezuela under the sanction, this is the example of countries under the sanction from the US, but they can survive and still they pose a huge threat to the US liberal international order. And this result can make the combination of new countries, new access to make a biggest threat, which one of the Russia, the biggest one, and the second China and North Korea also. These countries has nuclear power.
All right. Thank you so much, Lokman Kadarag, for joining us and bringing all of these insights into our special live coverage. And now protesters took to the streets around the world to support Ukraine in its crisis. People came together in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, holding banners and flags. The Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, was lit up in the Ukrainian national colors. The momentum was illuminated in support of the Ukrainian people for 3 nights. In various Italian cities, people held banners during a demonstration against the war in Ukraine on February the 27th. Always with the same story, protests erupted in Russia and around the globe on the February the 26th, with thousands taking to the streets in support of Ukraine, which is facing the 5th day of all-out military actions of Russia forces. Thousands of protesters have been arrested by Russian police forces in different cities of the country. Usama Aidi reports.
From Moscow to Siberia, Russian anti-war activists took to the streets again to protest Russia's military action on Ukraine, despite the arrests of hundreds of protesters each day by police. Demonstrators held pickets and marched in city centers, chanting "No to war" as President Vladimir Putin ordered Russian nuclear deterrent to be put on high alert. Up in the ante in the Kremlin's standoff with the West and stalking fears of a nuclear war. Police in Russia have arrested more than 2,000 anti-war protesters across the country on the 4th day of President Vladimir Putin's military action on Ukraine. This brought the tally of protesters arrested since Putin launched the military action in the early hours of Thursday to 5,250. In Moscow, riot police often outnumbered protesters, some of whom carried handwritten placards with peace signs and anti-war slogans in Russian and Ukrainian. Some wore masks with the word "enough" emblazoned in the front. Protests against the military action started Thursday in Russia and have continued daily ever since, even as Russian police have moved swiftly to crack down the rallies and detain protesters. The Kremlin has sought to downplay the protests, insisting that a much broader share of Russians support the assault on Ukraine. Ordinary Russians fear that stiff sanctions will deliver a crippling blow to the country's economy. Since Thursday, Russians have been flocking to banks and ATMs to withdraw cash, creating long lines and reported on social media about ATM machines running out of bills.
Akram, I would like to ask you here a point regarding Europe's decision to ban Sputnik and Arty from all European countries. Don't you think that this would be a slap in the face of freedom of speech?
It's definitely a slap in the face of freedom of speech and also freedom of press. And I'm personally calling for an intervention of NGOs, international NGOs that are usually very keen to criticize governments and entities that prevent press from expressing themselves. So yes, definitely, it's definitely an issue.
It's an issue, according to you. And let me just read for you this piece of information before I ask you the last question. The European Union has closed its airspace to all Russian aircraft, including private jets. More than a dozen countries in the EU had already banned Russian airlines like Aeroflot since Russia's move in retaliation. Russia has banned flights from several European countries. As a last question, Akram, what's behind this escalated development that hit the air flights in this case?
It will be very hard for the whole international community, because it will make the relationships between Far East and Europe quasi impossible, as they were previously, as the Russian territory occupies a big bunch of the trajectory of the aircraft. Mm-hmm. So it means that now they have to go the other way. It will take double of time, and it will have a lot of consequences on flight fares, unfortunately. It is probably now linked to the current tension and situation, and I expect that the things will come back to their normal situation after the end of the war.
All right. This is according to you, Akram. Thank you so much. You joined us as a journalist and expert in defense and security. That's all for today's live coverage. World News program is up next. Bye-bye.